for the 3 weeks. We are now getting closer and closer to Tisha B'Av, and we are all learning, and we know already how to build the Beis Hamikdash, but we have a few details that is not yet clear. We have the honor and pleasure to have today the Choshev and one of the senior shluchim in Mונטריאול, the Minial of Besrivke, Harav HaChosid, Harav Rabbi Yosef Mינקאוויטש, was going to enlighten us and give us some insight into the building of the Beis Hamikdash and the surrounding about the Beis Hamikdash. Harav מינקאוויטש, bevakasha.
Shukayach B'Shmuel. The Rambam in Hilchos Beis Abchira Perik Vov, the Rambam says that the Kedusha Rishena Shekisha Shleima, the first sanctification, the Kedusha, the holiness that Shlomo Melech put into the area of the Beis Hamikdash, Shehu Kiddush HaZorah B'Yerushalayim L'Shaiton B'Kichon L'Osid Lovi. He was Mekadesh it, he sanctified it for his time, and L'Osid Lovi for all the coming times forever. And then the Rambam adds, Lefichach, because of that, Makrivin HaKarbonis Kulam, you can bring all the Karbonis, Afal Pisha Esham Bayis Boni. Even though there's no built Beis Hamikdash, the Beis Hamikdash is destroyed, there's no Beis Hamikdash, nevertheless, you can be Makriv all the Karbonis. And the Rambam continues, in the next halacha, the whole reason why Beis Hamikdash in Yerushalayim is holy is because of the Shechina. Shechina ain't up Taylor. Shechina never becomes nullified. The Shechina is there. Once it's there forever. So this halach of the Rambam has its ramifications even in our times, and even involving an amazing herod, directives of the Rebbe. For this, I want to give a little bit of an introduction. Rabbi Yankov Emdin, the Yavitz, discusses a Gemara in Sanhedrin and another Gemara in the Psachim, a story about Rabbi Gamliel. We won't go into it now because we're short of time. And the answer, one of the answers that he gives, that Rabbi Gamliel was makriv the korbanos after the churban. And he tries to bring out that Rabbi Gamliel is Gamliel the Yavne, because we know the story of Gamliel, Rabbi Gamliel HaZokin, who was a grandson of Hillel, and he lived for sure during the time of the Beis Hamikdash. And his grandson, Rabbi Gamliel's son, was Rabbi Gamliel called of Yavne, and he lived part of the time during the Beis Hamikdash, part of the time after the Churban. So if he was makriv a korban and he wants to bring a raya that it was done after the Churban, it means that korbanos can be brought at that time. But there's a whole shakla b'tari, a whole long discussion about it. If this is really Rabbi Gamliel of Yavne, maybe Gamliel HaZokin, even if it's Gamliel of Yavne, maybe it was done before the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. So that's a whole area of discussion for itself. Then the Sefer Kafte B'Ferach, written by one of the Rishonim, Ashteri HaParchi. And he brings down an amazing thing, that Yerachim Paris was also one of the Baal HaTesvos. So in the year 5017, he said that he's going to bring korbanos. And he brought rayas for this, various rayas that you can bring korbanos in Bisman Hazeh. About 200 years ago, approximately, the Egyptians, the Mitzrim, they conquered Eretz Yisrael from the hands of the Arabs, who held on to it for hundreds of years. It was a period of time that was under the rule of the Mitzrim. At that time, they were very nice to the Yidden, and the situation for the Yidden was great, was extra special. So there was a Rav by the name of Rav Tzvi Hirsch Kaldisher, who was a Talmid, a student, a disciple of Rabbi Kiva Eger. So he was suggested that we should start bringing korbanos on the Har HaBayis at that time. And he asked Anshel Rothschild, who's the head of the bank family, the Rothschilds, that he should buy and purchase the place of the Har HaBayis for the Beis Hamikdash, or at least to get permission to be able to be makriv korbanos over there. He also involved Moshe Montefiore and so on. And he wrote in Halacha, he wrote a lengthy discussion that Pi Halacha, it's okay to bring the korbanos and the various questions He took care of it. And he wrote it to Rabbi Akiva Eiger, his Rebbe. Rabbi Akiva Eiger responded to him. It was going back and forth. And Rabbi Akiva Eiger asked his son-in-law, who was the Chassam Sofer, that he should also get involved and he should give his opinion about this. So the Chassam Sofer wrote a tshuva to his father-in-law, to Rabbi Akiva Eiger. He writes, Adeini, Meiri, Bechomi, going to Israel, B'chulu. So first of all, he writes that to go and ask permission from the people in charge now Yerushalayim, that they should give permission to be makriv karbonis. So the Chassam Sofer writes, he's a captain God. He's a person who's not so easy to deal with. And he said that nobody is allowed to go onto the Har HaBayis who doesn't believe in Islam. So in other words, if it's not Mamunas Yishmoel, as he says, can't go there. That's as far as the technical part. And then he goes in about the halacha. What about the unit of Tumah? We're all considered to be Tmei and Mesim. And also, you have to have a Kohen with the Yichus. You have to have the Avon with the Mizbeach. So he brings down, the Chassam Sofer brings down the Chavta V'Ferech that I brought before. Rabbi Chilme Paris, in the year that I mentioned before, 5017, was ready to bring karbonis, and he had the same issues, and obviously he felt it was okay. So he says that Tumah is Hutra B'Tzibur, especially by Korban Pesach, it says Tumah Hutra B'Tzibur. The big de Kahuna, it said the King Gadol is not Mi'akev, he writes. Yuchusei Kahuna, to have a Kohen who's Miyuchas, to know for sure there's a Kohen. He said you can establish on the Chazokah. And he said you don't need a Kohen Miyuchas. He goes into a lengthy discussion. Now, it's not enough time to mention everything. And then he concludes, we could at least eat the psochim, maybe not other karbonis, has a shayla about Tumah Hutra B'Tzibur, but the Korban Pesach is Tumah Hutra B'Tzibur. If everybody is defiled, everybody is Tumah, you're allowed to be makar the Korban Pesach even if they're Tumah. They can go on the Har HaBayis, that's everything else, even if they're Tumah. So there's many Gdei Yisrael at that time that dealt with this question, that raised this question this about 200 years ago, especially when Rabbi Akiva Eiger was involved, some Sofer, and they going back and forth about is it permitted, is it not permitted, and also to figure out exactly where the Mizbeach is, because the Rambam writes in Beis HaBchira, beginning of Perek Beis, that Mekeme Mechuvan BeYosef, this place of the Mizbeach is very, very exact. It can't be moved to any side. It has to be exactly in that place. I said that Od Marishan was Makriv Karbonis and Neach and so on and so on. And the Akedah was there. So it's exactly at that place. It can't be any place else. So they deal with that also, how to find exactly. We came in Mechuvim B'Yesod, we should be able to work that out also. The same to the Big Day Kahuna. There's from the later time, and closer to our times, Michal Tukutsinski was a very big goyin. He wrote a whole sefer, Ir HaKedesh VaMikdash, that deals completely and totally with this question, and he shows that there's no problem to bring karbonis. And same thing, this Dei Chemed also brings down about the karbonis, and he writes a number of sforim that deal with this. So this is just the idea, if we can be makriv karbonis, is man hazeh. Now the Rebbe, in the revolutionary Sikha that took place on Achim Shal Pesach Tovshin Chavches, which is less than a year after the 6-day war, that they got back the Har HaBayis in Shalayim Atika and so on and so forth. So the Rebbe said an amazing sikha that pertains to Pesach Sheni of that year. It was already after Erev Pesach. It was the first Pesach that was after the war. So the Rebbe says that even though there's many people that hold that can all be makriv according to Pesach B'zman Hazeh, and the Rebbe writes the Lashon Rabbu Ha'esrin. There are many people who hold that way, but nevertheless, since Rabbi Chilme Paris, as we mentioned before, hold that you are allowed to bring the Korban Pesach. So therefore, if somebody doesn't bring the Korban Pesach according to his opinion, so then it's a Chiyuv Kodesh. If you can bring a Korban Pesach, you don't bring the Korban Pesach, it's a Chiyuv Kodesh. And the Rebbe goes into a whole arichas, a whole lengthy discussion about that if a person didn't do the Pesach Rishon, the first Korban Pesach, he can do it even if it's a tzibur, even though the Gemara says that it's not dechet tzibur the Pesach Sheni, it doesn't get pushed off the Pesach Sheni. The Rebbe explains, depends why it was done. This was done for a side reason, a technical reason, then it is pushed off. The Rebbe goes into a lengthy discussion about that. So in any case, the Rebbe holds that we could make the Pesach Sheni also betumah. So therefore, the person is in Yerushalayim, not only in Yerushalayim, but within 15 mil, which is about 15 kilometers within Yerushalayim, he has the obligation to bring a Korban Pesach according to the Paris. So the Rebbe is not saying we should do it, because Rabbi Ha'esim, the Rebbe said, many people say that it's forbidden, but nevertheless, according to Rechumah Paris and others who hold like that, it means that we could bring the Korban Pesach. And if we don't bring the Korban Pesach, it's a Chiyuv Kodesh. So the only way to get out of this is not to be in the vicinity of Yerushalayim on the time of Pesach Sheni of that year, because Chav Ches was already after Pesach, of Pesach. But the Rebbe writes, the Mugadik Esicha, the Rebbe writes, it's even more so obviously pertaining to Pesach Rishon, that out of Pesach we should not be in that vicinity of Yerushalayim, of Tezvav Mil. And for sure the Rebbe says not to travel to Yerushalayim on Yudal Adiyah. Don't go on Pesach Sheni, you're not even in Yerushalayim, don't travel to Yerushalayim. And even if you say it's only a sofik and a svek, but nevertheless it's a big issue. So this made a revolutionary Iber Kerenish in the halachic world. And the big Goyin, Rabbi Zevin, wrote a lengthy letter to the Rebbe with many, many questions. And he numbered the questions, 1, 2, 3, 4, Chamishiyas, and 5 questions he asked back and forth. And the Rebbe answered all the questions. And the Rebbe answers them. One thing the Rebbe emphasizes, since we're speaking here about a question that is possibly a Isur Kodesh, according to Rechumah Paris. It's a Yin of Kodesh. And to a number of hours to be what's called the Derech Recheka. If you're Derech Recheka, you're far away from Yerushalayim, you're exempt from bringing the Korban Pesach. So it's just to be the Derech Recheka away from Yerushalayim, it's not Lav Milsa Rav Rebahu. It's not such a tremendous thing. And for sure, those that are not even there, for sure, they don't push yourself and to go into Yerushalayim, Dafki in these hours, when you're creating a question, creating an issue on yourself, that why you're not marking the Korban Pesach, when you should be according to the Rechumah Paris. And so the Rebbe concludes, answers in the letter, that's why I concluded that even if there's a sofik, one doubt, respect, fake, a doubt, on a doubt, but nevertheless, in our case, since Derech Recheka don't have to bring the Korban Pesach, so therefore they should go out, and those that are there for sure not come into Yerushalayim and should have any questions. And the Rebbe mentions, by the way, there's a separate discussion about people that never left Yerushalayim. There's some Yidden who never left Yerushalayim. I met Yidden like that. They never in their life, they were born in Yerushalayim, they never left Yerushalayim. So it's a separate deal the Rebbe says about those people. And the Rebbe emphasized them again that it's the same thing as for Pesach Rishon. One of the other questions that Rabbi Zevin asked the Rebbe, it's a Shaila Atzuma, tremendous question that in all the generations, we never heard about this. If this is an important thing, if Paris lived 900 years ago, how come we never heard about this? So the Rebbe writes that till the Milchomeh that took place last year was Yada Umas Kifo. The Goyim were in full control. And the Rebbe hoped, at least at that time, that within a year of the war, and at that time, the Arabs were afraid. The only problem is the Rebbe said many times, unfortunately, the Yidden were giving back, giving away, b'chulu, b'chulu. But if they wanted, they definitely could have done what has to be done, and to bring the Korban Pesach. If they had to bring it, they would be able to bring it if you're allowed to. Again, the Rebbe is not saying that you should, emphasizing that, because there's Rabbi Ha'esim, the Rebbe says. Nevertheless, since to be Yetzer, the day of Rechumah Paris, of that suffix, if you're not there, you have no issue. There's one of the questions interesting that Rabbi Zevin asked, that the Minchas Chinuch says something different than the Rebbe. So I'm not going to go into the whole thing. So the Rebbe writes, with all due respect to him, of the Minchas Chinuch, I'm not obligated to be deichek and to push myself to answer his words in a place where there's a question of kodesh. And it's also, the Rebbe said, it's the opposite of the Pirush HaPoshut in the Gemara. So he's not obligated to go and answer that. And and then the questions also about the Mizbeach. So the Rebbe says that according to the day of Yechilme Paris, we're talking about his opinion. So in his time, there was no Navi to say what the Mizbeach is, and nevertheless, he was ready to be Makriv the Korban Pesach. So in other words, there's many, many questions, but there's answers for them. And the Rebbe said, just now I received a kuntris called Karnes HaMizbeach, was printed in Varsha in Tov Reish Peiches, 1928, that gathered all the questions about this topic and gives the answers. The Rebbe said, even though some answers are difficult answers, but nevertheless, it's all gathered together. Then Rebbe Zebin also asked a question, he called it Shailas Tam. Shailas Tam, where do we find B'chlal a din of Derech Recheika by Pesach Sheni? The Derech Recheika Lehoyo is said by Pesach Rishon. It's not Derech Recheika, then he makriv the Korban Pesach and the Pesach Sheni. But where do we find that by Pesach Sheni should be a Derech Recheika? If you're far away, you don't have to bring the Korban Pesach. So the Rebbe says, he called it Shailas Tam. So the Rebbe answers the same lashon, Minor Tam. Simple answer. The Rebbe quotes the Mishnah Psochim, and also the Rambam brings it down and says Korban Pesach. Ma ben Pesach Harishon l'Sheni, and enumerates various things that are different between the Pesach Rishon, the regular Korban Pesach, and Pesach Sheni, and it doesn't mention Derech Recheika. The Rebbe said it's not any place, any place that I saw, and you can trust that the Rebbe didn't see it, it's nowhere, to say that he skipped out Derech Recheika, which means if it's not written, means that is not a difference. Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni have the din of Derech Recheika. So therefore, if a person is not there and he's far away, he's not obligated to do the Pesach Sheni, and the same thing is the Pesach Rishon. So basically, this made a whole tumult, and the Sikha was said, Achon Shel Pesach, and so it was basically a short while before Pesach Sheni. So many people, Pashut went and they left Yerushalayim. Some of them went to stay by friends, by relatives. And the next year was Pesach Rishon, was also the next year, Tav Shchav Tes, was even harder. The out of Pesach, to go out of the thing and be able to go back. Some of them went to Moitza, it's right outside Yerushalayim. So they went and they walked back. Some was on a bus. They got rid of the muktzah, and they made sure to get back on time or not to be there altogether. So this was the tumult about the possibility of being makriv b'korban Pesach b'zman hazeh. So because of that, even though we're not going to be makriv, because of many other questions, we said look about other shilos that came up, many shilos. We're not going to go into it. I'll take a very long discussion to go through all the questions and the problems with being makriv b'korban and korban Pesach nowadays. But according to Bechuma Paris, it could be done. According to some Sefer, it could be done. And other many poskim that it could be done. So according to them, if a person doesn't do it, it's a Yisur Kodesh. So the Rebbe asked they should be out. But then, in a letter that the Rebbe wrote, Tofshin Lamed Hey, that's 6 years later, the Rebbe wrote also at Gimeliyah, a day before Pesach Sheni. So the Rebbe wrote like this: continuation of the discussion we had going back, the Sikh of Achos Pesach Tavshich Ches. So the Rebbe says as follows: with our many sins, unfortunately, including that we start right just now, start saying to him, Ochihu. The story is told in Malachim about Ben Hadad when Achov won the war of Ben Hadad. They wanted to know he was saved. They wanted to know how was the relationship with him. So they came to ask Achov what's the situation. So what did he say? So the Rebbe says, they said, Ochihu. Hey, is he still alive? Ben Hadad, this is your enemy. He's called him Ochihu. Not only called him Ochihu, later he says he took him on the Merkava, he took him on the chariot even. So the Rebbe said, this is the situation that we are in now. So the Rebbe said, therefore, nishtane hamatzav. The situation changed. In other words, even according to Bechil Paris, you can do a Korban Pesach only if it's possible. If you can't do it because of side reasons, because Misad the Goyim and everything else, ve'ein ato hayecheles ve'efshorias l'shanes ve'livnes k'fi adorish la'krobes Korban Pesach b'chulu. Now we don't have the ability and the possibility to change anything and to build what is necessary to bring the Korban Pesach. Ulochein, because it cannot be done, not only it's a question of halacha, but it cannot be done, ein mokim, there's no place to say, shalei li is be'erev Pesach, not to be an erev Pesach, I'll be a dalad bir and Pesach sheni, korev Yerushalayim, tibon v'sekin. So the Rebbe said, from that year, the Rebbe said, that's unfortunately the situation has changed. So we cannot, even if we wanted to, with all these shtadlos and everything else, we cannot do it. So therefore, the Rebbe said that it falls off what he said before, because now it's not able, we're not able to bring the Korban Pesach. So even according to Bechil Paris, it goes back to the ways in all the generations that Rebbe mentioned before, and all the generations before, they weren't able. So Yad Ha'umas Tkifa. So in Yerushalayim, and nowadays, it's Yad Ha'umas Tkifa. And it's interesting to note that Shmuel Eliyahu, the son of Ramot Eliyahu, who's the Rabbi Roshi, and he's the Rav of Tzfas, he holds, and he mentions, he wrote a whole thing, he mentioned that the Rebbe said, take out everything else, but he's still pushing that we should now go and on the Har HaBayis and do what has to be done, according to Bechil Paris, etc., and to actually bring the Korban Pesach. So it seems that it's still going on, this question. But according to the Rebbe said that now is a time that it cannot be done. Ein ata yecheles be'efshorias l'shanes v'livnis. Now is not the ability, the possibility of being able to build. So therefore, that whole thing of being outside Yerushalayim, it falls off. And since Tav Shalom B'Hei, people were able to celebrate Yerushalayim without having any difficulties. So many Chassidim, those few years, actually, Pesach Sheni they were out, Pesach Rishon Avada. You can imagine what kind of difficulties it creates. But for Chassidim, the Chassidim that held on to it, they were the ones that did it, and they followed the Rebbe's words, which was Zeichen B'Kodev Mamish, to be makriv like the Korban Pesach, which have the Rebbe the Olamato, who you go leinu take it biad Mamish befrat Yem Azgula Lariz Alachai.
Ashkei Rabbi Mינקאוויטש for the insights that you gave us about the actual things with how to do it even before Mashiach comes. The Rebbe will help us right away. We'll have the Siyum of Golus, and to remind everybody that tonight at 9:25 in Mr. Hashem there will be a Siyum Masechta, which will be said by Rabbi Dr. Meir Zakles. Everybody's asked to tune in. A guten Tag. In the meantime, everybody get ready.